Thank you guys for coming. Last session of the day. We appreciate it. Could be having drinks, I know. My name is Paul Wu. This is my passionate topic, integration deep dive. My colleague.
Hi, my name is Gokul, and we both are on the same team. And my primary focus is data management, Power BI, and integration.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm focusing right now. Whole bunch of stuff, but it's all fun. I don't know how many of you have attended the best practice session this morning? Okay, a big chunk of the room. Good. Again, the assumption is you guys have at least played with the APIs we have for a recurring job. You guys have done the exercises with old data. You know how to do it. For this session, we're gonna focus on different things in Azure, BizTalk, Logic App, looking at the scenarios, and we're gonna have a lively discussion, hopefully. So, integration overview, scenarios, and deep dive. Simple. You guys have seen this. Anybody want me to cover this again? Thank you. You heard the pitch for hybrid cloud. Not everybody is in the cloud, therefore it's hybrid. Over here, I do kind of want to highlight a couple of things on this picture here. So on the left-hand side is the connectors, right? It's the connectors we ship out of the box for Logic App or Flow. On the right-hand side, you have the other Azure services, right? And the thing that glues kind of everything together is what sits in the middle, Logic App and BizTalk server. You'll also see things like the lower left-hand corner, the API management, the lower right-hand corner, Azure Service Bus. Who has not heard of Azure Service Bus? Okay, thank you for your honesty. I'm sure there's other people that are just not, So, appreciate that. So Service Bus, I have a little bit on what Service Bus is, but essentially it's a ESP in the cloud. Azure API management, this probably not everybody has used it. Who's used it before? Ah, cool. For production? Awesome. So I will talk about what it is, how does it relate to D365, and all that fun stuff. Logic App and BizTalk Server, obviously we'll talk about it. But in terms of landscape, right, these defines the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. And BizTalk Server, I'll just move forward with BizTalk. Again, I think previous session someone asked a very good question, which version of the BizTalk Server should we be on? If you can, upgrade to 2016 because that thing has built-in support for Logic App. And then on Logic App, we've shipped a BizTalk adapter, so you can talk to each other, right? We're trying to do the better together story in this case. Also, I think Goku also did a very good job mentioning in this session this morning that you don't need, I know the previous picture can be a little misleading because we have BizTalk and Logic App in the same core. And most people's like, oh, do I have to use both at the same time? Not really, right? If only thing you use Logic App for is, make an OData call into D365. Well, you could have done that with BizTalk today, right? And you could have done that with any version of BizTalk that supports a HTTP send port, right? And all you have to do, because we use AAD, authentication, OAuth, right? You need to do a custom behavior and associate that with a custom send pipeline. And that's all you have to do, right? It works today. So you have BizTalk already using BizTalk Server, orchestrating your business process on-prem, or any other on-premise middleware, right? Typical, whatever you have. Still use it, because you still have a whole bunch of on-premise business process you have to orchestrate, right? If you're trying to use Logic App to drive your on-prem business, you can, because Logic App actually ship a lot of on-premise connector, right? I'm not sure if you guys are aware, we have a SQL connector that connects to your on-premise SQL instance. I believe we even have an SAP that connects to your on-premise SAP. I believe you have a file connector, right? If you want to talk to, if you created a file and you want to know when somebody creates a file in an on-premise folder, we actually have a little connector you can install on-prem that does that. So Logic App has a lot of mechanism with which you can work with on-premise resource, but it's not ideal, right? Imagine all your application sits on-prem, and then you're trying to use Logic App to drive it, right? You have to suck data up to the cloud, and then push it down back, suck it to the cloud, push it down back. It's not very efficient, right? So it's whatever you orchestrate on-prem, still use BizTalk, typical, whatever you have. Keep your assets there, and just slowly move bits and pieces into Logic App, right? So that's the vision there. Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say on the next slide is keep using it as your on-premise middleware. You can use BizTalk and BizTalk alone to interact either through the Enqueue DQ API or through OData or any kind of custom service REST. SOAP is, BizTalk. If you guys use BizTalk or any kind of middleware, SOAP should be like that, right? Although, even if you're doing SOAP with BizTalk server, the authentication, you still need to get a token, right? So you still need to do a custom behavior on that pipeline. Any questions? So we can keep it interactive, keep it live. Any questions on BizTalk server, on-prem middleware, just raise your hands, we can ask. No? Okay, cool. So that's BizTalk, Service Bus. It's for asynchronous messaging. It's asynchronous messaging cloud platform. Obviously, it's a PaaS, right? So we host it. You don't have to worry about scaling. You just pay as you go. Pay for how much you use it. And it's really cheap to pay. I think it's price tiering. The more you use it, per message is cheaper. And it enables, architecturally, there's a couple of things that it gives you, right? And it's it's not an architectural pattern or a design that all of a sudden Service Bus give us, right? We've had the decoupled integration pattern long time before Service Bus, right? We've used BizTalk server as your on-premise ESB. We've done that a long time ago, right? It's just now you are able to do that in a more effective, cheaper, and Microsoft hosted way. Run your integration in the cloud. Reliability, right? It's Service Bus, that team or that service commits to a certain SLA, right? It's always up. It gives you data disaster recovery, so you don't have to worry about that. It's very easy to start if you have not played with it. I highly encourage you to just go create a namespace, create a queue or a topic, and just start playing with it. It's super easy to do. If you play with Service Bus on the Logic App, it's even easier because you don't have to write code. Logic App has a Service Bus queue and topic trigger, so if you post a message, you'll get triggered. You can actually post messages to a queue or a topic, no code. You just kind of glue it up. Load balancing and buffering is for. Here's the question: we say synchronous pattern and async pattern. Synchronous pattern is where you're making a call, right? Request and response. I call this service, I get a response right back. So my question to you is, if I'm calling X, if I'm interacting with X through OData, does it mean that pattern is a synchronous pattern? In terms of X, it is, because I'm calling X and X is giving me a response back, right? But if you step back and say, wait, if I have a source application, it's sending out these messages, say updates to a customer, status change on a sales order or whatnot, right? And you can actually buffer these messages on a platform like Service Bus. When I say buffer, it means you can post these messages at scale. Right? You can post 10,000, 100,000, millions of messages to Service Bus. Service Bus will be able to handle that, right? But then the cadence against which Service Bus put those messages through to X can be dictated by the Service Bus itself or whatever you use to orchestrate the flow, right? So the end, if you look at the last mile, yes, when we call into X through OData, that's synchronous. But it doesn't mean you can't use Service Bus as your buffering and as your decoupling mechanism to achieve the decoupling effect, right? So don't think about, oh, if it's file, it's asynchronous, or if it's OData, then it has to be it's type bound or by design. It's not, right? You should have things like a service bus or other enterprise service bus tool that you use that can provide you with that decoupling, that buffering, that load balancing that you would expect from a ESP. Does it, oh yeah, yes?
How does it connect with CDS?
Yeah, so the question is, how does service bus connect with CDS? Today, I'm not aware of a CDS connector to service bus. But on Flow, there's not a native out-of-the-box say, if I'm doing stuff for 365 for sales, I know we have a service bus connector, in the sense that if I change something on the account, boom, it published that message as a message into service bus queue, right? That you can set up on the sales side. We don't have something like that in CDS, not yet. Yeah.
Well, just one thing to add.
Yeah.
I think on the Flow, our thought process is all the connectors that are available for logic apps to replicate it on the Flow. But I don't have a timeline, but definitely we would have a service bus connector on Flow at some point.
Yep. Yes.
Regarding this talk, do you recommend use the logic adapter? Do you recommend use the HTTP adapter?
The question is, regarding BizTalk, when should I use a logic app adapter and when should I use a generic HTTP adapter? I would start with HTTP because if it's something that's very simple, 1 core, 2 call, you just want to orchestrate, use the generic out of the box, right? And if you have a lot of cloud workloads you have to orchestrate, definitely use logic app. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the bits about service bus. So how does it relate to? Another question? Yes.
What is the message size for the service bus right now?
As far as I remember, 56K or some K. So there's a certain, for that, you're not really bound to the message size there, right? Because a typical, what we call a worker queue pattern, right? Your message can contain just a handle, a pointer to a file or a message you stored somewhere else, for example, Azure Blob, right? You don't need to maintain the entire content of a message inside of a service bus queue message. And there is a certain size limit. I believe it's 56K, I'm not quite sure, or 64K. And there's certain retention periods on these messages too, right? And you pay for them. The longer you expect them to be retained, the more you pay. Out of the box, I think it's 7 days or 14 days. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, service bus, boiling the ocean. I like to boil the ocean. But I learned my lesson. It's very tempted as you're moving stuff to the cloud, right? You're doing a re-implementation of an on-premise ERP software in the cloud. It's like, wow, there's a lot of cool stuff that I can do in terms of integration, right? Service bus, API management, all that cool stuff. You feel very tempted to say, hey, let's redone our EIF, right? Let's redone our enterprise integration framework. Let's put everything in the cloud. Right? Let's use service bus. Let's use logic app. Let's use Flow. But if you're trying to do an ERP implementation at the same time you're re-architecting your overall integration strategy, it could be a really, really daunting task, and it could end up hurting your timeline for both. Right? So I'm taking off my engineering hat and architect hat and put on my project management hat to say, I would recommend take the iterative approach. Right? First, let's just get everything work. Let's go live with that, and then let's think about, again, in the future, going forward, how can we move slowly and taking these Azure technologies slowly, a second phase or something like that. Just something to think about in terms of project planning. Okay, ExpressRoute. Before I start, let me introduce what ExpressRoute is. Again, it's a way to extend your on-premise network into Microsoft Cloud over a dedicated private connection facilitated by a connectivity provider. Okay, Who's used ExpressRoute, not just for X, just in general? Okay, a few of you in production, right? Yeah. A couple of things to call out here. When you hear people talk about ExpressRoute, you'll hear them mentioning things like peering options. So what does peering option mean, and how does that relate to D365? So there's three different peering options: public, private, and Microsoft. Okay. If you search X wiki help ExpressRoute, I think we have a little wiki page with 2 paragraphs on what we support in terms of D365 for ops, in terms of ExpressRoute. Right? The support that we give is the scenario we're targeting is, say, a customer says, when my user is accessing D365 for operations through a web browser on a computer that's logged into my on-premise network, I want the traffic to go through a dedicated channel, right? That we support. That is a public peering, which means we're exposing public Azure IPs so that your route table and all that knows how to route your traffic into our public Azure IP directly without sharing traffic with the public internet. So we only support public peering for your access, for having dedicated access to operations. If you have set up ExpressRoute for other enterprise applications, you might expect, because if we look at the previous slide, the very definition of ExpressRoute is a way to extend your on-premise network to Microsoft hosted blah, 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 right? That bit itself, it's a little confusing because, does that mean I can create a VNet in Azure, throw a domain controller there, extend my corporate network to Azure, and then I can ask Microsoft to deploy the operations there. And then whatever on-premise services or resources that I have hosted on-prem, operations can see it. Perfect, right? No. So you can't. Public peering does not equal to VPN. So you will not be able to see on-premise services and resources you have. Right? So that's a key differentiation. Key point I want to make here. Your on-premise resource is not visible from operations, right? No VPN. So, which leads to another question is, great. Now you're telling me I don't have access to my on-premise services. What if I want to just call out some secret sauce web service that I have hosted on-prem that I'm not willing to, over my dead body, move into the cloud? I'm going to keep it running on-prem, but again, this is my secret sauce. I don't want to put it on my DMZ and have internet people trying to pay my service, right? I don't want to expose it. I don't want to poke holes on my firewall to do an inbound. Proxy. I don't want to do that. So what's the option there, right? So there's 2 options. One is application proxy, and one is API management. I'm just going to quickly check how I'm doing on time here. So for application proxy, it's really simple. Have you guys, in order to do integration with X, you have to register your application against AAD, right? I assume 99% of you guys have already done that, right? And I don't know if you guys noticed, now if you do the same process, there's a third option to say, register on-premise service as the application to access your Azure resources or something like that. So if you pick the third option, you can actually download this little connector guy and install it on your on-premise network, right? And I don't know if you guys know or use the service bus relay. It's essentially a way to expose your on-premise service to the whoever you want to expose it to without punching in inbound hosts on your firewall. So it's an outbound only bidirectional communication channel, right? A relay mechanism. And this is exactly the same thing. Right? Consider that little connector that we have you deploy onto your on-prem system, the relay agent. Right? It relays calls and it's bidirectional outbound only. Very simple to set up. I highly encourage you guys to go out there to Azure portal, create one. It's 5 minutes to have it up and running. What this does is it's going to, when you create it, you specify exactly where your service is, right? You can even do wag localhost wherever your service URL is. Because essentially, what the proxy which lives in Azure is going to do is it's just going to relay that URL back to this on-premise guy, and then the on-premise guy is going to make the call, right? That's it. So you don't have to do any changes to your on-premise web services. You don't need to punch holes on your firewall. You don't need to change your service or infrastructure. All you have to do is deploy that little proxy guy and deploy the connector, and then off you go. You can have X, the service interface that we expose eventually, it's going to be an Azure public URL, and if X wants to call it, X calls the proxy guy will call the on-premise connector, the connector will call, yes, questions? The question is, does the connector work sorry. I will put, the question is, does the connector work only on Windows servers? What about Linux servers? I'll put in a request for Linux server. I don't know. They might have one, but not that I know of. The one customer that we've done this with, obviously they have Windows server. Yeah, and this, yeah, that is. And over here, I just kind of want to go through very briefly the authentication flow, right? So once you expose this API on Azure Proxy, right, who can call it? So Azure Proxy guy is actually authenticated against AAD, right? You go to AAD, authenticate yourself, you get a token, you pass it to application proxy. Application proxy says, yep, I know this guy, you can go through, call my API. Then you go through to the application proxy connector guy that sits on premise. The proxy connector actually is going to impersonate whoever called it to talk to your on-premise AD to say, hey, do you know this guy? And you can absolutely set up SSO between your AD and AAD, right? So everything gets flowed through. Your on-premise AD is going to issue the token with which the connector is going to go call your end service. So pretty standard relay type of token flow. This is where it gets really interesting is how does Azure Proxy work with ExpressRoute? And I just need to warn you that it gets a little bit confusing and tricky. If I don't explain it very well, let me know. I'll try to explain again. So this first one is application proxy with ExpressRoute public peering, right? You can see there's one part where we're highlighting this guy right here is that's the part where we're saying that's where the optimization comes from when you have ExpressRoute, right? Because let's look at this picture. Your customer network is still your customer on-premise network because this is public peering. You're not extending your customer network to Azure, right? Which means the connector guy needs to stay on-prem, right? The app proxy, obviously, it's in Azure. So if X calls the application proxy, the application proxy calls the connector code. That part, right, the public peering part, is dedicated traffic. Right? So that's, if you have public peering ExpressRoute set up, application proxy would still work, and that's where you'll have dedicated traffic. And if you have private peering, which means you can extend your custom network to Azure with a VNet. Therefore, you can deploy indeed the connector into the VNet in Azure, right? And then when we call, AX calls the app proxy, which lives in Azure. Application proxy calls the connector, also lives in Azure. Guess what? Dedicated bandwidth there, it's all in Azure. That's going to be super fast. And when the connector reaches back down into your on-prem network, you have private peering, you have ExpressRoute. Again, that part is also optimized, right? So my question to you guys is, between these two different approaches, with application proxy with public peering and application proxy with private peering, which one would you use with X?
The private, if you have the private one, the X product subscription is in the Microsoft tenant. You can't access the private one.
So what was said here was, if you have a private peering, your subscription is Microsoft subscription. How do you have access to whatever is deployed in Microsoft subscription? But if you look at this picture here, let's take the caller, which is X, out of this picture, right? You can have ExpressRoute with private peering. This is, if we just look at the right-hand side of the picture, it has nothing to do with operations, right? It's just a way you expose a on-prem web service through application proxy with ExpressRoute private peering. That's it. It has nothing to do with operations, yeah? Operations is not even in the picture, right? And if we put operation back, operation is just another consumer app that can call this service endpoint, right?
But then you have to expose the app proxy public.
App proxy is exposed, I wouldn't say public, is because you can do what they call a connection group, where you can set up white IP listing. And then obviously there's AAD authentication associated with it. But you're right, because application proxy is an Azure service, it's discoverable by everybody. Except for you can whitelist it, right? And also if somebody's trying to do DOS attack, guess what? It's only going to hit the proxy. It's not going to hit your on-prem service, right? So hopefully that distinction is clear, right? So in terms of, if you just want to make sure X can call your on-prem service in a very super fast way, you can definitely do private peering, because that's just the way you would expose your on-premise service, right? It has nothing to do with how X is deployed or how you access X, right? X, in this case, is just a consumer of that on-prem web service. Yes?
Which would be the difference of using ExpressRoute and the VPN?
What's the difference between using an ExpressRoute and a VPN? When you use VPN, it does not guarantee dedicated traffic, right? You're still sharing traffic with other people who's on the internet. Versus, like if you do a site-to-site or point-to-site, right, you're still sharing bandwidth with other people. Versus ExpressRoute, this is dedicated bandwidth just for you. Yep. I have to actually have a lot of content to cover, so I'm going to rush forward. API management is also fun. I think a few of you guys have used it. This actually takes your API management to the next level, right? It's called API management. So it's management of API. It gives you really nice things, access control, who can use your APIs, how often they use it, rate limiting, throttling, right? So you can only call my API 10 times a day. If you call the 11th time, it's going to be a different rate. Monitoring, event logging, response caching. You can improve the performance of your API. It's a very generic Azure service that would enable you to manage your API economy in a very effective way. If your corporation is in the business of providing APIs for other people to manage and access and use and make money out of it, yeah, this is definitely the direction you want to go, right? Because you can throttle, you can monetize it, monitoring, and all that. How it's related to X is, one thing I need to point out is, okay, why are you talking about API management when we're talking about X being able to call into an on-premise service? Well, because with API management, not only you can manage the APIs you have deployed in the cloud, you can also manage the APIs you have hosted on-prem. How do they do it? VPN, right? So they actually, essentially, you have to establish whatever site-to-site, point-to-site VPN between Azure and your private network. And then your on-premise API will be discoverable through API management, and they'll just call into, there's three things there in the middle. The middle guy there, it says gateway. This is a screenshot I took from just a generic Azure site. So the gateway is the one that actually calls and throttles and does the rate limiting, does the caching and all that, right? So that's the core of API management. And you also have a publishing portal where you can go publish your APIs, and a developer portal where not only your own developer can go there and look at the documentation, and also the consumer of your API can actually come in and look at your documentation. Again, next level kind of stuff. If you have a lot of APIs you need to manage that people actually uses, you want to throttle, you want to charge people, you want to kind of control the traffic, monitor the traffic. That's the direction you want to go. Relies on the VPN if you're exposing your service on-prem. How does this relate to this topic we were discussing? It's because this also allows X to call into an on-premise service through VPN. Right? It's a completely different approach. Quad-6. So, how many of you guys have heard Quad-6? Okay. How many of you have used in a production environment? Cool. So for those of you who has a customer who's not willing to pay for a Logic app, Quad-6 is your best bet in terms of how to interact with a recurring integration job. And I promised, Tomek, where are you? There you are. The gentleman over there is the father of Quad-6. So for our implementations, we're recommending Quad-6 for customers, again, for customers who doesn't want to pay. So great big thanks for Tomek for creating this open source project that benefits the community. I promised to start this session by asking you guys, if you see Shri, tell him, hey, Shri, Paul said to please sign off on the releasing of this app. The reason why it's stuck with Shri is we're using this open scheduler, which is open source, and there's some licensing stuff that he needs to sign. And we've gone through legal and all that. It's right now in his inbox. And so if you see him, just say, hey, please sign off that Quad-6 so we can use it. Please. Pros and cons for Quad-6 is very easy to configure, very easy to use, and the best of all, it's free. Can't get better than that. Some cons, manageability, because this is a self-hosted solution, so you have to throw it onto the VM somewhere. If it goes down, you have to maybe run 2 VMs. I don't know. There's a lot of things you have to manage on your own, right? It's the same situation with any self-hosted software. In terms of scalability, we've never run into issues that I know of that it scales because all it does is just killing files, right? Making API calls. It should scale for you, but again, it's just one service you're running on a single VM. In terms of scalability, you have to manage that. Error handling and real-time alerts. There's some error handling built inside of the app itself. If you want to customize the behavior, obviously you have to. It's open source. You get the source code, so you have to customize it. Real-time alerts, when I say real-time alerts, I'm talking about if you're calling in-queue, again, I'm assuming you guys are familiar with in-queue, familiar with recurring integration job. For those of you who's not, come talk to me after the session, so I'm just going to continue. Real-time alerts is if you call DQ or in-queue and you call a job status, it says process with error, right? And the default behavior is it's going to move the file to a different error folder. But you don't get alerted, right? You have to. I was talking to another one of my customers, like, "Hey, Paul, I need to spend $80,000 to hire this guy to monitor this on-premise folder to see if my integration actually got through." I was like, "Wow, $80,000? Hire me! I'll do that. I'll quit my job." So yeah, real-time alerts. It's not something that we have out of the box for Quad-6, but it's definitely something you can build. And I know customers who's customized it. It's really simple, right? Just write a little app, monitor a folder. If a file gets dropped, send an email. It's really simple. Dual scheduling is, right now when you schedule a recurring job, you need to schedule it twice, right? You schedule it first time in X, and then you go to Quad-6 to schedule the job that actually gets the file, if it's export. Right? If it's import, you schedule the import job in X, you go to Quad-6 and you schedule an import job again. So that's not ideal. With Logic App, it's iPaaS. You know what Logic App is. Just kind of a couple of house cleaning item is we do have one type of connector on Logic App to Dynamics 365 for operations. If you type that into Logic App action, you'll see the list of connectors we have. It does CRUD, create, update, delete. And the last action we added is actually execute. So which means you can actually execute all the custom services that's exposed, right, on your 7 instance. We also have a generic HTTP connector that you can use to interact with in-queue, DQ, job status, and ACK. which is the 4 APIs you guys should be very familiar with. Also the 4 APIs that QuadsX use to enqueue and decode stuff, to do import and export. There's enterprise integration pack for your B2B scenarios for EDI, right? Your S2, X12, Edifact, whatever EDI format that you work with. Enterprise integration pack can help you to convert it into XML format, which can be consumed by operations. It is the preferred way to interact with recurring job, quote, if your customer is willing to pay for Logic App. Okay? Yes? Yeah, that's you must have missed it. The question is, how do I get QuadsX? The idea is for us to publish it on GitHub, and the reason why we couldn't publish is, Shri is not signing off. So go talk to Shri. No, it's completely different. Way better. Way better. The question is, how about triggers for the operations? We're working on it. It's not available. But it's definitely something we're working on. Pardon me, I'm going to delay all the questions to the end because there's lots of stuff we want to get through. For Logic App Pros, scalability, manageability, guaranteed delivery, error handling, real-time alerts, cons not free, and it's only available in the cloud. So for your on-prem deployment, you can't use Logic App at this point. But never say never, right? In terms of Flow, Flow is, I don't know if you guys have used Flow or not. It's no Azure is needed. You can just go to flow.com or flow.microsoft.com, I don't remember. And you can just start creating flows, right? It's for democratizing integration, for the citizen integrators. It's actually built on top of, it's just a presentation layer we built on top of Logic App, right? It's the same engine. So connectors that works in Flow, most likely it'll work on Logic App. And then we have a slide on when to use Flow and when not to use Flow. So Flow versus Logic App. I'm not going to go through the details. If you guys want to know more, just search Logic App versus Flow. There's a really good blog out there that compares Logic App, Flow, Web Jobs, Azure Functions, all that. So go ahead and read that blog. I'm not going to get into the details. Let's jump in the demo. Of the Logic App? Yeah, okay, sure. I'm just going to jump into, we've been talking about Logic App, blah, blah, blah. Let's see some demos. So I gave you guys a sneak peek of what's here, right? I'm just going to set this up really quickly. Again, the goal is using Logic App, not just any Logic App, but one Logic App to orchestrate all your inbound traffic, right? It works with any number of projects, any number of entities, right? And then I have another Logic App that's used for export, okay? And just show what's going on in again, fleet management customer, no poll here. Over here, I've scheduled just one recurring integration job. In this job, let me just load this up really quickly. It's just fleet management customer, right? Takes one file. If I go to manage. So how can we use one project to orchestrate, or one Logic App to orchestrate all flows, right? What's the magic there? The magic is, well, we've actually added the mapping between a file prefix and a DMF definition group entity. So when you get a file, we actually have written a custom X++ service to say, give me the name of the file, and then I'll tell you which activity ID to call enqueue against, right? That's essentially very simple. And then you can set this up. When you schedule a recurring job, you can set this up on a per entity base.
One real good thing. When I demo this, I get one question. Does this handle multiple companies? Yes. You can have one more record in there. And for FMC, you can prefix like _ company name so that the whenever a Logic App enqueues the file, operation knows that this file should be published to that particular company.
Exactly. Okay, so that's how you schedule and manage the job. And I have 2 export jobs too, which I'm going to use one logic app to kind of dequeue the file. I've previously have put these 2 export jobs on hold. I'm going to turn them back to active. Very simple jobs here. It's just exporting customer group and vendor group. Every time you export, it does a full push. Okay. I'm just going to drop, again, this file structure is very, you guys should be very familiar with, input folder where you put the file in, error folder. In the error folder, we actually have multiple folders here to say if things fail for different reasons, we'll actually put them in different folders. Processing is when the file is processing. Processed is, if it's processed with no error, we'll put the file there. It's part of guaranteed delivery, right? We guarantee we don't lose your file. So over here, it's the empty input folder. I'm going to drop a couple of things in here. I'm going to drop a customer file. I'm going to drop a customer group file. Okay, just 2. What I'm expecting here is because in terms of mapping, I only have set up mapping for one, right, the customer. So if my CG file goes through, I should be able to know, the logic app should say, oh, I don't know what this CG file maps to, so I'm not going to import it. So if I go to my outbound flow, you'll see 2 runs gets kicked off concurrently, which is nice. So if we look at this particular flow, it's able to call into X to get the mapping, right? So the argument is FMC_001. So I'm expecting the return value to be the activity ID, right, which I get back. Oops. This thing is live, that's why it's flickering. So I get back a type of entity name, the entity name, and activity ID, right? You guys get the idea. And with which we construct dynamically the URL against which to call enqueue, right? So we call enqueue here. This URL is not hard-coded. It's dynamically concatenated with this file. And if that goes through, we move the file to the processing folder. We have a 30 seconds delay, so we don't call get status right away because it's a batch job, right? We'll give it some time to actually run. And then we actually have a loop that keep calling the get status. The reason this is not a really best practice because we don't want to increase the load on the server by keep calling get status. Ideally, we would call a timeout action here, right? A delay, right, for like a minute or 30 seconds, whatnot. The reason why we're not doing that is because at this point, you can only put one action inside of a do until loop in logic app. And I think either sometime this week or next week, they're going to enable inputting multiple actions in that do until loop. After that, we'll just put another delay action there so we're not constantly calling get status on the job. So once it's processed, we'll move it to the process folder, and everything goes well. We're not going to send you alert, right? So let's actually take a look at the other one. The other one, again, we call this customer service to get the mapping. This one says, I don't know what this file is, so I'm going to return activity ID nada. Which case, logic app says, oh, there's no activity. I'm going to move the file to this error folder. I'm going to actually send you an email with the file as attachment. So if I go to my email, voila, here's the email. The areas failed to get a recurring job mapping. If I click to it, there should be a attachment. Why am I not seeing an attachment? Anyways, there's supposed to be an attachment, which is just a simple property you can set on the logic app. I can show you guys that. Under advanced options, you just say, because for some reason we didn't attach the attachment. I could have just clicked on the attachment and then say file content, right? Put file content here, put file name, attachment name here. Boom, done. Right, that's why I'm not seeing the file content. I'm not seeing the attachment. So I've demoed here is guaranteed delivery, real-time alerts for this guy who did not get a mapping. I got an email alert, so the guy, admin, can actually go in and see what happened. And then I'm going to actually go ahead and go back to my integration project. And I'm going to add that customer group entity right here. I'm using the same sample file. Okay, it's added. Then I'm going to go back to my Manage tab and say, hey, this file prefix is CG, and then I'm going to, again, USMF, and I'll save it. And then I'm going to come back here to my input. So if I refresh here, this file will be gone because my browser is not refreshing. That's why you don't see these two files being moved. But I'm going to go ahead and drop this customer group file here. Boom, you'll see, those two files gone. Now Logic App should be kicked off. So I have Logic App running at a 5-second cadence because I want my demo to be nice. Ideally, you don't want to run the trigger too often because you actually get charged for the number of times the trigger fires, right? So it really depends on your customer scenario, right? If it's most likely a file upload, you don't have to run it every second. Definitely not every second, right? Maybe run it every hour, so you just fire this thing every hour. It's not that big of a deal. Over here, yeah, you can see the first call actually got through, right? As soon as we added that mapping, it knows, it's a customer group, it's this activity ID, therefore we're going to be able to call in queue with that concatenated URL. Boom, it'll go through, this will be successful. If I go back to, say, manage messages, you'll see one message actually got queued. I was going to demo another one with data package. Essentially, I have a zip file. I can go ahead and create a new project, right? And then I'm going to specify it's actually a zip file. I can drop, again, I don't have to go to Logic App to do anything to Logic App. As soon as I create the project on the in-act to say I actually intend to use a data package, which is a zip file with this project, I can just drop the zip file in the Logic App, in the OneDrive folder, and then off it goes. I think we're running short on time. I'm going to skip that demo, but you're welcome to come by afterwards. I can demo it to you guys. Another thing I want to discuss is, I have another export flow, which is the same. Oh, actually, export flow should have worked. So if we go to remember I enabled those two export jobs before I started demoing import. The outbound Logic App is constantly running in the background. So if I go to my outbound folder, I should have showed you guys this before. I don't have any. Yeah, there we go. Hey, that was good, yeah? There was no file. I refreshed, there was file. So the outbound is working magically behind the scenes. It's grabbing files from the export flow. Again, schedule one scene inside of X. For outbound, we have the same logic. Calls the custom service to say, how many active export jobs do you have? And then I'm going to call DQ, right? Very simple. And then I'm going to walk through how, now it's like, oh yeah, Paul, great, you have this in your subscription. How can we get that? For the X++ side, we'll publish it in GitHub, I promise, very soon. This one, we don't need free to sign off because it's all X++. We can just publish it. So that'll be done. At the same time, we're also going to publish this ARM templates. It's very easy to create an ARM template out of a Logic App. I'll show you guys the ones we've created. For example, for inbound. For the inbound template, we've created this ARM template. When you can just, we'll publish this JSON file to GitHub. All you have to do is download it, create a ARM template, paste the JSON file in there, and then do deploy. When you deploy, we have already parameterized all the values, right? What's your service URL? What's your client ID? What's your secret? What's the email I should send alert to? Everything that's specific to a customer is parameterized there. You just need to fill these out, press purchase, boom, the same logic app will get deployed into your own subscription. It's super nice. What else? Oh yeah, I'll just show you guys one more thing here. So the previous logic app that we've seen, this one, we actually did not create that from scratch. We created from deploying the template. So you'll see here on the HTTP connector, if I pull this down, it's all parameterized value, right? So for a developer, if you don't want your developers to look at your password, you don't trust the developer, you can just deploy, and then when I'm working with this, I don't know what your password is. So it's super nice. And ARM templates obviously has integration with Azure Key Vault, right? So if you don't even want the ARM guys to see the password, you can actually put the ID, secret, whatever you want into the Key Vault and have that integrated into the ARM template. So when nobody sees it, other than the guy who's actually working with Azure Key Vault, right? So in terms of deployment, this is beautiful. I think, yeah, that's it.
So in terms of the scenarios, I will not go into details. We discussed this morning. So this is a scenario where we have a web front and customer is keying in orders, and this is a specialty retailer, so the volume is low. These are kind of the decision tree that we discussed this morning, and I'll go through this. So in terms of tips and tricks, we discussed about post-only set properties. Then we discussed about guaranteeing the transactional scope with the batch single chain set, and no support for dynamic array. So if you are using, let's say, timesheet, it will not work with OData. So we are banking on the mobile framework service that we have built to process the timesheet. So we are going to build an entity on top of it, and you should be able to use that entity to publish the timesheet. And the last thing there was a header and line pattern. So what I'll demo today is, or what you would have also seen is AX generating the number, you providing the number sequence, whether it is a sales order or any header or child-based document, you provide the number sequence and AX will generate order with that number sequence. So we'll just jump into the demo here. Okay. So one thing we spoke this morning about authentication, and from fall release and August release, we made a change in terms of how integrations authenticate. So under system parameters, under system administration, you would see a new menu item light up called Azure Active Directory Applications. So all you need is a client ID here and a name and the user that is tied in with the AX. So that user will be the one if there is a user ID mapped on the transaction. And in terms of authentication here, so as I mentioned, you don't really need the username and password anymore. All you need is the client ID and the secret key. So that way, it's very specific to this application. In previously, before August release, you were supposed to provide both username and password. That means that anyone has this username and password, they get access to a whole lot of applications on your Azure. So in terms of demo here, so I have 3 scenarios here. So the very first call I have a sales order get successfully created, and we'll go through the batch setting that we described. And the other two scenarios I have is sales order fails, wherein you get the transactional control when the line fails, the header is rolled back. And the last one here is we are splitting the batch option. So just to demo, header, all the details on the header is fine, but line has an issue. So in this case, since we are not batching it together, the header will get created and line will fail. Let me run this guy. So if I go and check in the fiddler, on very high level, you would see one call for get authentication. So as I described morning, Azure AAD is our identity provider manager. So all we are doing is, hey, this is the secret key and this is the client ID, and AAD is getting back to me with the token. And I would use that token in all our subsequent call to create a sales order header and line. So in this case, if you see, I'm creating both sales order header and line. And interesting thing here is, since I've used the batch chain set, single chain set, it's actually batching the request. So in one request, one HTTP request, I have a sales order, so post sales order header, and this is my JSON file with all the details, and then I have the sales order line and the JSON file corresponding to that. So if I go back to the code real quick, so these are the two parameters that we spoke about, post-only set properties and the batch chain set. So now I want to go through, and sorry, if I go back to AX, the sales order would have got created. So 1099 is what I used, and the sales order got created. And this is the ID that I used. So this is what I meant, you would have to provide an ID. So we'll also put in a sample code there for you to call X++ class to get the number sequence. Comment this guy. So let's really look at real quick. So in this scenario, I want, if the line fails, I want the header to fail, right? So I have provided a site that is invalid. So because I've used a batch with single chain set, then it should roll back the entire transaction. And this last example I have here is, so here I'm saying that I don't want to batch it with a single chain set. I want it to be independent operations. So let me run this guy. Okay, it came back and said both of them fail. So let's go to AX here and see what got created. So if you see 1009 got created now, and there won't be a line for this order. Sorry, let me just check what was that. So the sales order number was 7. Yeah, this is the one. So if you see, the sales order header got created, but not the line. So this is a pattern where you control what's your real need, and if there is a scenario where you want to break it down, like I want this set of data to be created even though some of the set in the batch that I'm sending would fail. So you would use this pattern, and the good thing about this is it's still a batch, so the HTTP call that's going out of this app is still one single call with header and line. So in terms of this code, we have checked in this code in GitHub last week, so you can download this code from GitHub, and we will put an example there probably next week sometime on fetching the number sequence dynamically. So, yeah. So, good question. So initially when I showed you the Azure app, so you tie that particular client ID with an user, and that's the user that's using behind the scenes. Yeah, that's what I meant. From fall release onwards, you don't need the username and password. So you are using the client ID and the secret key. So if you still want to share your password, we still support that. You can go ahead and do that, but it's just that it's more riskier. Okay, so Paul, do you want? I think we had one more slide. Or we'll open it up for questions.
Let's do questions. No
Okay,
questions?
I guess previous session they had a lot of questions.
Is there a recommendation for synchronous versus asynchronous in terms of pattern for integration?
Yeah.
We have a session tomorrow, which is a repeat of what we did this morning. So the morning session is recorded, so you can go watch the morning session.
Yes. Not that I'm aware. But onto that note, though, I do want to add. I don't know how many of you are building sales to operations integration. Ooh.
Okay.
I highly. That's very concerning.
There is a session tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I highly recommend
I think it's
you
called
guys
shipping and
to
packing unified something.
Yeah, I have that session pinned down. Sorry, my schedule. It's tomorrow at 1:30 to 2:45. It's called Selling and Shipping Using Integrated Business Process Across Sales and Operations. It's essentially presented by our SCM team, who's driving the scenario, prospect to cash, between sales and operations. I'd highly encourage you, whoever is building integration between these two applications, to go there to see exactly what we're doing in terms of first-party integration before you go off and build, a whole lot there. Yes.
We're limited to 10,000 rows on all the roles.
Yes.
How can we reach transactional consistency, especially with users using the Excel connector?
The 10,000, we do have a 10,000 limit, but that's on the server-side read. For a yeah, sorry.
I was doing the same, 10,000 at a time thing, so if something is
Because Excel goes through the Ardo data.
Same frame.
Yeah.
So
Again, when you bring stuff into Excel, it goes through OData. Therefore, every page it reads 10,000. Right? That's just reading. So in terms of transactional scope, there's not much there. But if in terms of writing, how many things you can batch in a single OData batch request is 1,000. So you can only batch 1,000 objects in a single batch request. And that's the transaction scope. If any one of these, because the option is called batch with single change set, yeah? So if anything fails in that batch request, the whole thing goes away. Nothing gets committed. So it's all or nothing within that single batch change set. I don't know if I answered your question, but we can definitely follow up. Yeah.
There's a question.
Yes. Azure Mobile Services, Azure Mobile App question. I'm assuming you're talking about the Azure Mobile App. Okay. So in terms of, Azure Mobile App is part of Azure App Services, right? We have the 4 apps, API app, web app, mobile app, and logic app. The short answer is no. We don't have any out of the box. But even some of the stuff that's very specific to mobile app is actually migrating, like some of the authentication stuff. I guess the only thing that's specific to mobile app is the offline DB piece. That's only mobile app, Azure mobile app will have. The authentication piece and all that is all being integrated into the rest of the API app services. But in terms of what's the relationship between that and X is, we don't have any out-of-the-box interaction with, because we host our own service. So we don't use mobile service to host. You could do a mobile service front-end endpoint that handles kind of authentication for you if you're writing a mobile application. But if you were to write a mobile application against X, I would encourage you to look at 3 things. First is our out-of-the-box mobile development process. You can create a workspace and publish it. I believe we have a session on that. The second one is obviously Power Apps.
Power Apps.
Right? The third one is if you want to write your own native app, just go against our OData service endpoint.
Is there anything on the roadmap to implement further OData features like the search feature and the contains number expression?
Not that I know of. Yeah. Yes.
Do you see any of these integration patterns changing as CDS evolves and sales and operations need to talk a lot more?
The question is, do we see any changes, architectural changes, design changes to third-party integration, knowing that we're working on first-party integration through CDS? The current priority for the team is still getting the first-party integration to work between sales and operations through CDS. So that's, I can honestly tell you, we're not looking at how to use this extended for third-party integration. But should we? If we're using CDS already for first-party integration, I don't see why we wouldn't allow a third-party application to join into that integration. There's no reason why not. We don't open it up. But are we spending any resources or investment working on it? I don't think so at this point. Yeah.
I think the only thing to add to that is you'll see more connectors. So as in when we build the connectors, we'll also expose those connectors to logic apps and flow. That's the only change you would see.
Yeah. And I would encourage you to go to the session tomorrow
Yeah.
and ask them tough questions like this. And ask them tough questions like, how do you handle, multi-master bidirectional syncing? If I were to use third-party, this entire infrastructure for third-party integration, how do you guys handle that? It's definitely fun, interesting challenges that we need to solve. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, like we talked about, I think, go ahead, man. Transactional scope for...
Yeah, that's the one we discussed. So your batch change set defines whether you want single change set or multi-independent.
Yeah, I understood that was asynchronous.
No, the one I showed is real time, OData call.
Yep. very good question. I believe so. Because if we roll...
Yeah, it should. And it depends upon how you develop the entity and the things that you are doing within the context of entity.
Yes. The question is, we know OData itself, if you tag it with batch with single change set, it guarantees the all or nothing in terms of that OData request. But what if on the X side, my X++ code is touching other tables? Does this other table get rolled back as well? And our answer is it depends on how you write the X++ code. If you write it properly, yes.
Yeah.
Are there any limitations to the queue, like file sizes or
When you say queue, are you talking about the service bus queue or our queue?
Blob store.
In queue, DQ. Yeah. There is, because in queue, DQ, when you in queue, we just put it in the blob storage, right? So depends on which server what kind of hardware you're testing with. It's essentially just the long-running process that's going to upload a file to the blob storage. But I wouldn't, the real bottleneck here is not the in-queue process itself. It's if you have a huge file, DIXF itself would not be able to handle a huge, if you have like a gig file and you're trying to import as one file, DIXF will go belly flip. Yeah.
And we are also releasing a hotfix in a couple of weeks so that there is an easy way for you to delete the older messages that are stored in the blob.
Yes.
Sorry?
When will the package be available? Oh, the Logic App stuff? Yeah. I am being
so
recorded.
We can take it offline because,
yeah,
because Matt they're part of the CAT customer, so
yeah.
We can discuss also.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but for the rest of you, the code itself is checked into my VSTS account. The ARM template, it's ready to go. We just need to tie some loose ends. I'll try my personal best to get it published as soon as possible. This one's on me. You can pin me for this one. But for the other one, you know who to bug. Yes?
Do you have an estimate on when are you going to release the triggers for
Yeah. So the question is, do we have any plans and roadmap on when we can release the trigger for operations? Yeah, I talked to the guy who's working on it, and he's telling me I'm working on it. And remember I was telling you guys we just enabled the execute on the connector? He just finished that. And he's a really good guy. He did a whole bunch of bug fixing on the existing connector, because before, even if you read more than 500 records with that connector, it just... so he fixed a whole bunch of performance bugs and usability bugs there. As soon as he wraps up this related work item, he'll move on to the trigger stuff. Anything else? All right, go get some drinks. Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Do fill out the survey if you like it. Thank you.